Hey guys, Chris Clothier here with the Grind Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us again for another Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, whatever day you choose to listen to the Grind Podcast. I say thank you. I really appreciate it. To all of the grindaholics out there, that is not a term that I made up. That was a term given to me. We are growing at a rate of over 1,000 subscriptions and listeners a month. So that is amazing. Thank you so much. We appreciate all of the support. We appreciate all the questions. Look, we were doing this because we love talking about real estate and entrepreneurship, and you guys apparently like listening to some of the stuff we say. And today we wanted to go back and kind of rehash and recover a little deeper on one of our most popular podcasts. We were talking about cheap houses and cheap housing, and I'm going to go into a few things today, talking about, this myth about real estate and this rule that has been out there about you always buy low and sell high, and how that suddenly morphed into buying lower and then buying lower and then buying lower until pretty soon we were buying the lowest price stuff on the market. And I kind of rephrase that out there of buying cheap crap. And, look, as consumers, we're hooked on buying cheap stuff. All of us look for deals. Not all of us. Let me just rephrase that. It's a common thing that we like deals. If something is on sale, half off, 2 for 1, whatever, we look to get into it. We look to buy it. If we can convince ourselves or be convinced by a seller that something is priced at a real steal, something that is a deal of the century, super lower than what I can get anywhere else, we're attracted to it. And there's a lot of research and a lot of time that gets spent by marketers into making that a reality. So I'm not throwing that, out there on my own. I'm saying that is truly how we behave as consumers. And it's not necessarily an American thing, but let me tell you, for straight up, it is truly something that happens here in the States. As American consumers, we gravitate as a whole to things that we think are deals, things that we think are cheap, inexpensive, half price, red tag sale, we're on it. So how does that affect us as real estate investors, and why do we need to avoid it? Because buying cheap is very, very risky. From a business standpoint, if you're in a business out there where you are in a race to the bottom, meaning you have to continue to cut prices, offer sales, put out deals, if that's the business model you have to follow in order to get sales or compete with others, then I really implore you to listen. Pay attention to some of the stuff that we talk about on here. Look back at our history, because there was a point in time where we as a company had to do the same thing. That was a strategy we had to follow. Late 2010, so we're talking 07 to 2010, that time frame. There was a lot of racing to the bottom. There were fewer buyers out there. It was a tough real estate market. Housing was at a low point as far as pricing is concerned. I don't even know what cheap was back then. I mean, it was crazy how low everything was. And everyone, it seemed, was racing to see who could discount and cut pricing the fastest to get something done. And, again, we had been conditioned as sellers and business owners to offer that because the consumer had been conditioned to respond and buy that. Well, I talked recently in one of my podcasts about, being an outlier. There's a great book out there called A Category of One that we read years ago by Joe Calloway that taught us that while everyone else is chasing the big piece of the pie, be the lone person chasing the little piece of the pie. What we decided was we were no longer going to race to the bottom. We were going to level up the services we offered. So therefore, we were actually going to raise prices, but give real value and try and recondition the investor, the American consumer out there that, hey, stop buying cheap. Stop buying the deal. Stop feeding this frenzy that if they'll just cut the price or offer me some incentive, I'll take action. And instead, really dig into what's real value. What am I getting in return for what I'm putting out there? That's not original. I believe it was Charlie Munger that said, price is what you pay and value is what you get. That's real. Who cares what something costs? What are you getting in return for it? And if the value is high enough of what you get in return, then who cares what you pay? When it comes to real estate, and I've got my whiteboard over here where I've got, a lot of notes left up here on the wall. Listen, cheap houses are everywhere. But who determines what's cheap? See, what especially in real estate, this is what happened back in the late 2000s, is that people began to advertise to California investors. You hear this stuff all the time. The California guy, California girl that comes in and buys stuff super cheap across the country. And the way that they were being marketed to and conditioned to buy was, you have to pay $500,000 out here for, a nice, middle family home. An investment house is going to cost $200,000 and it's a little cracker box. Come to the Midwest, where everything is really cheap and you can buy a $50,000 house that's got 3 bedrooms and 2 baths. You can't even get a garage for that in California. Come buy this cheap property over here. And there was a reaction. It worked. The problem is the seller was conditioning the buyer to purchase things that were cheap compared to where they live. It was easy to say it'll cost you $200,000 in California, but only $40,000 over here in, middle America. And the reality was the $40,000 house in middle America really should have been bought by a local investor for $10,000. But because it was cheap compared to where the buyer lived, they were reacting. It was a deal. It was low priced. It was, the red sticker sale, whatever. Understand that when I talk about don't buy cheap houses, what I reference is understand and know your market. If you come to Memphis to buy housing today and you pay $100,000 for a house, that house was being sold a few years ago, or valued even a few years ago, most likely below $50,000. If you come to Memphis and buy a house today for $60,000, most likely that house was in the teens just a few short years ago. That's not appreciation. That's lack of supply. That's demand. That's marketing at its best. That is a consumer being convinced that, hey, $50,000 is super cheap compared to where I live because I can't get an investment for $300,000. So let me go buy 6 of these because they're so inexpensive. They're so cheap compared to where I am. I could buy 1 door here or 6 there. The hard reality that many investors have learned over time, some have been able to escape it, some are still going to learn it going forward, is that these cheap houses, they never really go up in value. They never really appreciate and they're only cheap compared to where you live. Here in town, they're not cheap. They are overpriced, under-renovated, under-demanded, and usually in challenged parts of town. And that's just in Memphis. That's the same with every single city that's out there. When you buy on the lower end of a city, and you buy based on where you live, comparing it to where you live, the likelihood of making a mistake, the likelihood of learning a tough lesson is very, very high. My advice is always don't buy something because it's cheap compared to where you live. Buy something because the price you're paying and what you're getting in return provides really high value. Excuse me. You find it less and less, unfortunately, in today's super hot, overheated real estate market. It's harder and harder to figure out what a good investment is, because today when you buy a six-figure investment in Memphis, you're thinking to yourself, look, it's six figures. It's a $100,000 property. I remember when $100,000 properties were median priced. Well, it's no longer median for Memphis. Not anymore. The median home in Memphis is much higher. I don't have the current, data today, so I don't want to say something that is wrong, but I'm going to look into it. I believe it's probably in the 160s to the 170, price range for the median home price in Memphis today. That means anything down in that lower price point, of $100,000 and below, is most likely in a higher challenged area. Was most likely, due to lack of demand, was half of that cost just a few years ago. The other thing that I think investors really have to understand about real estate. So let's take this cheap, property price to one more level. Let's go one more step up here. How does it get priced that we think it's cheap for its current market to begin with? So in other words, if you look at a house and you can see that it's clearly being sold below its true market value at a time when there's super high demand, right? So that means in a high demand cycle, nothing should be available below market value, even for investors. I mean, if you're a long-term buy and hold investor and you're buying houses below market value today that are already renovated, let's be clear with this, in a period where there should be no deferred maintenance, there shouldn't be a lot of work needs to be done. You're getting a lot of value when you buy this house and you're paying well below market value. You need to understand something. Either there's no demand, real demand for what you're buying, and you're being marketed, that way. You're being marketed that this is a high demand property, but there's really not. Not if you're buying it well below market value, okay? Because demand means that these properties need to be sold at market value. But listen, if you are able to buy something below market value today that is not a value add property, two things have happened. One of two things have happened. Either you're buying a property that really hasn't been renovated. Money was saved on the front end by the seller. The old adage of lipstick on a pig was performed, and you've got major issues here because money was saved by the seller by not doing renovations, therefore keeping the price below full market value while they still are able to make a profit. The second thing that could occur is that the seller that's selling you the house isn't really that interested in making a profit. So therefore, they're not trying to maximize the return they can get on a property. They're perfectly willing to take less and let somebody else make more. Not a lot of us know people that way. Not a lot of us know sellers that are like, hey, I absolutely want you to make all the profit. I just want a little bit of the profit. But I did a full renovation. I did all the high-end work to this, absolutely 100%. I just don't want a lot of return for my time and my investment. Again, how many of us believe that that's what's taking place out there? Very few business people, very few real estate investors are going to forego profit to leave a lot of profit out there for somebody else without having cut other corners. Does that make sense? Because your time is worth something. So when you look at a property that's being sold below its true market value, it's cheap, all right? It's being marketed as you have a lot of equity in this house. What's really taking place here? Most likely, you're buying a property that is under renovated. You're buying a lipstick on a pig type of property. And that's what I really dig into when I talk about cheap houses. I talk about these, houses that are low price for a reason. They're low price because there's no demand. They're low price because they're not renovated. They're low price because they're in challenged areas where, there's not basic services like, transportation and food and, other things that attract, good, high quality residents that want to stay long-term. And there's those types of properties in my opinion, are left better to local investors, left better to those that have greater resources, left better to the investor that says, I'm going to work within the community to rebuild, so that there's basic demand from the ground up. Too often, out-of-state investors, they're attracted to the deal, they're attracted to the cheap based on where they live, as opposed to cheap for where it is. And we just react to marketing rather than basic, good, fundamental real estate investing principles. And notice, please, that I said we there, okay? I put myself in this. If you know anything about my past story, you know that I talk about cheap housing from myself being a complete idiot at times when I invested. Early on especially, I made a lot of dumb mistakes. And, so I talk from having learned these lessons, and I understand that this is not a smart, high-quality investment to make. So, look, wrapping this up real quick, thank you so much for being with me for the last 16 minutes or so, but here's the deal. Don't buy something because it's cheap compared to where you live, okay? Certainly not far from home, certainly not far away in some other state, 1,500 miles away. Buy something based on good fundamental principles based on where the property is, and remember, the price is what you pay. The value is what you get. So pay up for great value. Pay up for great houses, great services, very few headaches that you're going to have. Absolutely. Okay. And if it costs less to invest somewhere else based on where you're at, make sure you are investing in the same type of property you would invest in at home. Don't buy something because it's less expensive or cheaper than what you can get where you're located. That's absolutely the wrong reason to invest in cheap housing. Guys, I appreciate you joining me. Thank you so much to all the grindaholics out there that stayed with me for 16 minutes. I appreciate it. Look, have a great weekend. Whenever you listen to this thing, take some notes, spend some time with it. Let me know what I can do better. Let me know what questions I can answer for you. And until next time, guys, commit to the grind. Thank you all very much. We'll see you.